Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, if you're watching us on YouTube, please be sure to like us and subscribe. If you're streaming this particular episode, then consider also supporting us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com and put in Your Spiritual Journey with Bob Dove. We welcome your support. So today's guest, even though we're doing this interview over Zoom, is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we're broadcasting from. And I am really excited about having Kim on our program. Her name is Kim Chestney. She's the author of 3 leading-edge intuition books, including the Illumination Code, and that's on display here if you're watching on YouTube. And that was just published this year, 2024. The other 2 books are Radical Intuition and The Psychic Workshop. She's the founder of Intuition Lab, a global school for cultivating intuitive ability, and is known for her unique contemporary perspective on intuition as a learnable, universally accessible, defining force for the future of humanity. And that may sound pretty grandiose, but as we get into it, you will find that she's probably hit the nail on the head with that one. She's been named as one of the leaders of Pittsburgh's creative revolution, and she's been an innovative force in personal and cultural transformation for nearly 2 decades. Creating new spaces for intuitive expression, including an art gallery, a creative business incubator, and hundreds of cross-sector events, she founded and produced the internationally acclaimed Create Festival. And that's been going on for 10 years, and it brought together thousands of leading-edge artists and creative entrepreneurs from all around the U.S. In 2018, she was elected to the Americans for the Arts Advisory Board for her outstanding achievements in the creative economy. And she's been recognized and supported by organizations like ABC News, Women's World Magazine, Carnegie Mellon University, the Omega Institute, the Shift Network, SXSW Interactive, the Santa Fe International New Media Festival, the Edgar Cayce Center for Research and Enlightenment, Coast to Coast AM, and others. And I'm just going to stop there because there is so much fun stuff to talk about with this new book that Kim has come out with. But I want to begin with your spiritual journey, Kim. So if you could talk about that from childhood till now, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me here, Bob. It's great to reconnect with Pittsburgh, whether I'm there or not. Obviously, I love Pittsburgh, and it's really been a really deep part of my journey, actually, the years that I've spent working there. I'm not originally from Pittsburgh, but I am a native Pennsylvanian. And, my sort of spiritual journey started as a young child when I actually had a number of extraordinary experiences in my own life that I needed to learn to understand. I grew up in a haunted house to kick things off on a fun note. And my family and I saw some crazy things and witnessed some crazy things over the years. So one of the things that really stood out to me as a young person is that, I had witnessed these sort of events that the world said should be impossible. I've been taught that, doors would close themselves. There'd be bumps in the night. You'd hear voices. And we had so many people witnessing these things that we realized that, okay, there's actually something going on here. This is not just our imagination. And it really ignited a curiosity in me from a very early age as to what's really happening. And as, my life progressed and my spiritual connection deepened, I began to have more of these experiences and really consistent sort of interaction with that sort of deep dimension of life and reality. So for me, understanding the psychic world, the intuitive world, the metaphysical world really became a passion. I went to school and I studied metaphysics, philosophy, writing, art, all the things that I could do to channel my intuition and to really understand how the world works. And I really feel like a lot of it is culminated in this book. Finally, it's taken me probably 40 years of life experience to really get to the point where I could write this book. And it really goes deep into how our intuition works and why these extraordinary supernatural phenomena are now actually understood as a normal part of living in a world post quantum revolution. When we understand the quantum dimension of reality, it strangely starts looking like the psychic dimension of reality. So it's really cool to see how modern science is now coming together with mysticism and spirituality and starting to say the same thing. So really, it's great seeing my journey validated here at this moment in time with physicists and scientists coming out now talking about how these things work, how paranormal activity is really very normal, and it's just a byproduct of living in a quantum reality. So it's time for us to talk about that and look at it and share it with each other.
Yeah, let me back you up for a minute. Uh, just to know if you were raised in any particular denomination or religious background that was maybe generational or from your family.
Yes, so that's actually an interesting story. So I was raised, my family was a very traditional Protestant family, but I think that we didn't go to church a lot because I think, my family had sort of fallen away from that sort of ritual of going to church on a daily basis. But I was always very curious about spirituality. And when I really started to have my spiritual awakening, I actually converted to Catholicism. I went through the RCIA program when I was at about 22 years old, and when I was living in Canada, and I worked for the Catholic Church for a while. And to me, the reason I did this was because going back to the original church, the mystical church, the saints of St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Teresa of Avila, all of these beautiful things, John of the Cross, really had this sort of mystical understanding of the world that I could relate to. And I really felt seen for the first time when I hadn't in other places. So for me, becoming, a part of this sort of tradition, this lineage of spirituality in terms of the mystics was a very powerful step in my personal evolution.
Uh-huh. So where are you now with all of that?
Now, I mean, I truly believe that all religions are really different ways of looking at the one true source, and that whatever our pathway is to that one true source is a beautiful pathway. So I respect all religions, and I see the beauty in them. But for me, I really look at more of a Unitarian view, where I sort of bring together the parts of all of the different religions that connect with me and work with that.
Okay. So do you have any particular spiritual practices that you engage in on a daily basis that I don't know, meet your spiritual needs?
Yeah. So for me, I think, well, working with your intuition for me is a spiritual practice in itself, because as Paramahansa Yogananda says, intuition is the soul's power of knowing God. The Pope talks about intuition when he talks about discernment and that inner voice that allows us to know right from wrong and to guide us. And so really, for me, intuition has a very sacred place in the spiritual practice, is learning to listen to the voice of God, the voice of the universe within us is very key. So I do intuition practices on a daily basis. I do creative practices, really working to get into meditation. Insight meditation is a beautiful practice for connecting with your intuition and learning to really listen and hear the sacred voice that's always speaking to you. So when we start to live by that voice every day, then we can really align with our real path and purpose and real interconnection with life.
Yeah, I have to confess to having used a couple of the meditations that are in your book as
Right.
guided meditations with a couple of the spiritual groups that my wife and I facilitate.
Wonderful.
So it was partially to give a preview to the content and the richness of what you've written here. I see you as pretty brave in having taken on quantum physics, which is scary terminology for a lot of people. They hear a mention of quantum physics and they say, well, that's beyond me, forget it, I don't want to hear about it. And what you've done is taken quantum physics and shown us the applicability of it in our everyday lives. And for that, I applaud you because I've read a few books on quantum physics, and mainly there's sort of the layman's guide to quantum physics, and I just found your book really inspirational in terms of your applications and its daily use.
Well, thank you. That means I did my job, because that was my whole goal with writing this book, was really to make quantum physics something relatable, and we can see how it's at work in our everyday life. It's not something just for scientists in the Hadron Collider. It's we're living it. It's all around us. It's part of us.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's a fascinating read. And we're talking about the Illumination Code, which is a 2024 publication, so you may not have seen it out in distribution channels in a major way yet, but I'm sure it will be. And it's one of those books that you may look at and say, this might be beyond me, but surprise, it's not beyond you. It's really within you.
Yes, I love that.
Well, there's a tagline you can use.
That's right. I just might. I like it.
Yeah. So I guess some of the things that I'm curious about is, when did it first trigger in your intuition, I've got to do this, I've got to write this book, I've got to make these connections for the average person? When did that happen?
Well, interestingly enough, it just sort of happened to me. I was busy in my 20s and 30s, really doing a lot of personal research and working on my own spiritual journey, because I needed to understand what was happening in my personal life. And I began, going and taking classes on intuitive development, learning metaphysics. Like I said, I was studying philosophy and metaphysics in school. And I was in an intuitive development group one night. And this is when I was pregnant with my first daughter. And we would do intuition exchanges, and we would take turns practicing our intuition with each other. And the woman that I got, her name was Joanna, and she was fantastic. She was always the most gifted one in class. Everybody wanted to be partners with her because she would just do these amazing things. And so I was so excited I had Joanna that night, and I wanted to hear what she had to say to me. And she's like, Kim, she's like, I just have this feeling you're going to be writing a book in a year. You're going to have a book published, and it's going to change your life. And I remember going home from that meeting. Actually, I remember sitting in my car and remember exactly how everything looked. And I was so bummed out because I had no designs on writing a book. It wasn't on my radar screen. I wasn't even ready to even think about sharing any of this. I was still learning it all myself at that point. And I was really disappointed because I wanted to get some big, deep spiritual insight in my life. And this book thing came up out of nowhere. And well, long story short, within a year, I did get a book deal with a great agent. It was published around the world in multiple languages, within a year of time. So the universe kind of brought it to me, and it was really cool that it was sort of revealed to me in this intuitive way, which is I still practice with people that way in my classes. We still do these intuition exchanges and shares. So I think it came to me. And at the time, I really honestly didn't think I was ready. I didn't think I was worthy. I was just, I felt like, oh, like this, like I'm not an expert in this field yet. And so it really pushed me out of my comfort zone to come and take on this topic with you. Say it is very brave, because talking about intuition, especially 20 years ago when this book came out, was still like I had people at work being like, can you read my mind? Like everybody at work was, there was the talk about this book on psychic development, which was really sort of controversial at that time. Now we understand it. I think that it's much more a natural part of life, but I was really part of that first wave of books and information that was coming out, letting people know that everyone has intuitive ability. You don't have to be born with superpowers or anything. So that was a real first shift that happened about 20 years ago, and we recognized that this is innate and in everyone. So since then, I've just been really out there, sort of being led by my intuition to push it further and deeper. And ultimately where we've gone with it is quantum physics, because that's the root of it. That's how it works, right? So once we start learning how to use our intuition, and these magical things start happening, and they will, and they do, trust me. And once they start to happen, the natural question is, well, how is this happening? How does it work? If I think of someone and they call me a minute later, how is that possible, right? So I really wanted to answer those questions, and quantum physics has those answers. So it's really exciting time to be alive and get this perspective on all of this magic that for centuries and centuries as human beings we've been witnessing and talking about and experiencing, but it made no sense to us rationally because we didn't understand quantum physics back then.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well, let me just back up a second, and you mentioned people at work. So where were you working? Are you still working, or are you just writing and doing your workshops? What's
Yeah,
happened with your work life?
Yeah, so as I've always been an artist. I got degrees in art and writing and philosophy, and then I ended up getting into graphic design, which put me into a wonderful job I worked with at the Pittsburgh Technology Council, which is the place where I did a lot of the things that you talked about in my bio. And I worked there for 20 years, and I had a wonderful experience in getting to work with tech companies, getting to work with artists, entrepreneurs, starting to create festival, really, really getting to connect with the community, and really this what I call sort of applied intuition, levitating people that are using their intuition to innovate or to create new things or to build businesses. So intuition is a very practical force too. It's not just the sort of spiritual woo-woo thing. It's something that even like Steve Jobs, Einstein, Tesla, all these people talk about intuition because it's such a powerful force in humanity moving forward. So we need our intuition to innovate and bring ingenuity into the world and create new things. So I was working in that space for many years, and very early on when I was young is when this was happening, years before I did all the Crate Festival work. But then ultimately in 2018, I decided that, it was time to go full time doing this work. And I run Intuition Lab now full time. We have a faculty of 5 different main teachers, and we've had over 1,000 students around the globe. So it's really been exciting to work with so many intuition lovers and people who are so enthusiastic about applying intuition to their life and exploring the inner frontier.
Well, one of the things you talk about is synchronicity, and a light bulb just went off for me because your name sounded familiar. I used to write grant proposals for the Pittsburgh Technology Council, and and I had run into your name, if not you personally, a
Yes.
few times. So
Yes. I worked a lot. I worked with the Benham Foundation. Jim DeNova gave me a lot of the grants that we use to work with Carnegie Mellon and to create a lot of those different offerings. So yeah, we're in the same world, and that's so cool that you worked at the Tech Council too.
Yeah. Well,
Small
they
world.
do a lot of good work. There's no doubt about that.
Yep.
So there are so many concepts, spiritual and quantum concepts that you covered in your book that I'm not exactly sure where I want to start. Uh, the One of the concepts, I guess, that I've run into here and there on the periphery of things that I've read and studied is that concept of time travel, that space travel itself is going to be able to go way beyond where we are right now. And that when we think about the aging process of astronauts and being out there for light years and how is this space travel going to work, it seems to me that quantum physics has the answer to that. And I just wonder, because of those concepts of time and space and how they can collapse, could you give a brief explanation of your take on all of that?
Yeah, so I think time is one of the most fascinating concepts that we start to have to reimagine once we recognize the reality of quantum physics. It's like, I think it was Niels Bohr who said, if quantum physics hasn't profoundly shocked you, you haven't understood it yet. So when we look at quantum physics, we hear things like, there's no such thing as time, right? Everything is connected. The world is part of the system that interacts with each other invisibly through a quantum field that we can't see or touch or hear with our senses. So part of this whole reality of time and space and this illusion that we sort of live in of three-dimensional existence leads us to this understanding that time, in so much like Einstein talked about with relativity, is relative towards this particular moment where we live and where we are in the now. So time itself is not really a thing, right? So we understand that really time is just something that we perceive because we're living in reality. But in the real reality of all is that everything is happening in the eternal now, in this moment. The past is still happening now. All of the potential futures that are out there are happening now. It's not that we're predestined, because the thing is, when we talk about electrons and particles and waves, we're talking about this sort of collapse of potentiality into reality. And based on our choices, we sort of co-create our own path through life with the universe, sort of collapsing that wave, creating time as we go through it from our unique perspective. So we don't live in a world where things are predestined, but at the same time, everything out there is already embedded informationally in the quantum field around us. So in terms of time travel, space does some really interesting things with quantum physics and wormholes and this ability to sort of bend the space-time continuum. But ultimately, the most interesting time travel to me is the time travel that we can do within us, is knowing the future, knowing things that have happened in the distant past. We have access to all of that through our intuition. People for millennia have been talking about prophets, psychics, people who could predict the future. It's not a coincidence, and it's not everybody just making stuff up. It's really possible. I talk about that in my book, and I start with a really powerful story in my own life of how a prediction came through, which was part of the reason of why I actually wrote this particular book. And the same goes for the past and for things that are happening other places, remote viewing. All of this stuff is possible now with quantum physics because all of that information is stored in the quantum field around us and is accessible by our intuition.
Okay, so audience, I hope you got all that. If not, replay this segment, uh, and you'll get it eventually. Uh, and as part of that, uh, the thought of meta reality versus the reality that we're living, uh, and then there's this whole concept of the hologram and how that fits into all this. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the holographic universe theory is so exciting, and I think it's very deeply interwoven with our intuition. So, scientists in recent decades have put forth this idea that we actually live in a holographic universe, and this is that we live in a universe that's built not of stuff and things, of material objects, but instead of information and light. So we know information can travel very quickly and can be embedded in huge amounts in light. So light is a natural medium for information sharing. And what we find when you break down all the molecules and particles into the quarks and quanta is that the universe is built of tiny little bits of information embedded in light. And what does that sound like? It sounds like a pixel. We think about computers, right? It sounds a lot like a pixel. And so it's really not far-fetched to think about things like, are we living in a simulation? And I actually had a really great interview with Jesse Schell from Pittsburgh and Schell Games talking about if we're living in a simulation and intuition's role in all of this. One of my favorite talks, actually, that I've done with folks. So thinking of a holographic universe, if everything around us is built of this light and information, it almost feels like we could be living in a video game. It almost feels like we can be creating our reality as we go because we're not living in this world of physical objects so much as we are living in a world of energetic projections. So this is really interesting news too for intuition and explains why we're able to know things and access things just by listening to that inner voice within us. So you don't have to go sit on a mountaintop to get an intuitive download. You don't have to meditate for 12 hours. It's right here. It's within you all the time because with the holographic universe theory, the whole universe is not just made of these pixels of light, but these pixels are holographic, which means everything in the whole big deal here is embedded in every little piece of it. Like remember the holograms we used to have as kids, right? You'd make them look funny because you could see all the different things in them. So the reality is that it's all embedded everywhere within us in all these particles. So we have access to all the information of everywhere in space-time within every particle of space-time. So it's a really beautiful theory, and they're working out the details of it in physics land right now. I don't know the depths of that in terms of the actual research and when we're going to get concrete explanations of it all, but it's really pointing in that direction. So it's also, it's exciting, and it helps us understand why intuition is really so important because our thinking mind can't read that information. It's our intuitive mind that's meant to read that information. And that's how we have moments of genius, moments of insight that come out of nowhere and arise out of seemingly nowhere because they're coming from that quantum field within us.
So speaking of insights and coming out of nowhere, when we are thinking, where are our thoughts coming from? Because there's a difference between our brain and our thoughts. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, are all these thoughts floating out here and we just kind of pick one from there and pick one from there? Or is it because there's a vibrational frequency to certain thoughts and we have a certain vibrational frequency, and so when they match up, those thoughts we decide to own? How's that work?
Yeah, yeah, I kind of like that way of looking at it. I think that when we understand the universe, part of it being built of this light and information, it really intimates that we are built of consciousness. The universe is alive and conscious, and so these thoughts that we have are sort of thoughts that we're all sort of participating in together. So based on our frequency, based on the alignment and the flow of where our thoughts are, our thoughts are magnetic. We know that from the law of attraction. We know that from different, magnetism, right? There's things that we're drawn to when we're on the same wavelength. So with intuition, it's really important to, be on a high vibration wavelength, because that's sort of where all that information is stored, right? It's stored in this sort of deep dimension within us. It's actually very high vibration and high frequency. And when we're in lower states, it can be harder to access that when we're in states of unconsciousness. But the more awake we become, the more conscious we become, the more we're able to tap into these sort of invisible high frequency wavelengths that feel like thoughts that can pop into our head. So I really like the way you look at them as these sort of thoughts that you sort of grab and pull down, because it's like a download when we have an intuitive insight. It just downloads into our mind, just pops into our mind. It's one of the hallmarks of intuition, is that it's a thought or feeling or knowingness or idea that arrives out of nowhere. We're not thinking it up. We're not coming to any rational conclusions. It just arrives. It's just a knowingness or a feeling that we simply receive. And it's because we are receiving it from that field. And whether it's through that sort of alignment or flow process, a creative process also gives us that feeling. We're able to sort of tap into that field and let its insight and wisdom just pop and drop into our mind.
So there's a difference, however, I believe from reading your book, between an intuition that is something to act upon and, as a thought. But there are also thoughts out there that I want to reject and say,
Yes.
no, no, that's too
Yes.
low frequency for me, or, that isn't me. And
Yes.
how do I distinguish between the thought that, is one that I should act upon and one that I should reject?
Yeah, that's one of the first things I talked about with people about when they start developing their intuition, is that we have a lot of voices in our head. People say, "Oh, just listen to the voice in your head." Well, we need to really check ourselves, because it would be nice if our intuition was the only voice in our head. But unfortunately, we have other voices. We have our inner critic, right? We have this whole part of ourselves that has been programmed by society to doubt or to say that we're less than, right? We have fear, we have anxiety, we have our social conditioning, right? We have all of these different voices we have voices of people in our lives that may have sort of limited us or projected things upon us. So there's so many different voices. So what we really want to listen to with intuition is listen for that one true, still, small voice within us. And there really are some characteristics. And I go into this really deeply in Radical Intuition, the book that came out in 2020, is really how to strongly identify your intuition so you know it and trust it in everything you do. And I think that's really a goal for all of us. So it's recognizing that, your intuitive thoughts, first of all, they always come from a place of peace and power. They won't make you feel less than. They won't make you feel afraid. They won't harm you in any way or harm anyone else. Your intuition is your best friend. It wants you to rise into higher consciousness and awareness and help the world to do that too. It's the true north, right? So our intuition really is our best friend and the only real true friend that we have in this life. And it abides and it stays with us. So if you have a thought pop into your head, you want to sort of put it to that test. Does it stay? Does it abide? Is this a feeling or a thought, a knowingness that stays with me? Sometimes you just have fleeting thoughts that just, kind of drop in, pass through. They're not yours. Maybe you pick up on someone else's feeling. Maybe it's some random bit of static from the quantum field. Just let that go. It comes and goes, but intuition stays. For example, if you just have the thought, I should call my mother, right? Like I just have this thought. Well, it could have just been like a rational thought. Well, I haven't talked to her in a few days. I should call her. If that's the case, it might come and go. If it's your intuition, if you don't call her, a couple minutes later, you'll probably get the thought, oh yeah, you should probably call your mom. Don't forget to call your mom. And it'll keep coming up, that it will abide. Your intuition will keep being persistent, because for some reason it wants you to take some action, to do something good, or to, to sort of, to sort of fulfill the goal of that particular intuitive impression. And that can apply to so many different things in life. For, example, with me, like I was working at the Tech Council. I had a great job. I loved it. I loved working there. I loved all the people I worked with, but I really also had this calling to write this book and come out and teach full time. But I kept like pushing it down. I was like, it would be like, maybe it's time to go full time and leave your job. And I'd be like, no, I can just wait another year. And it just kept getting louder and louder. And finally my husband said to me, listen, he's like, if you don't write this book, I feel like something bad's going to happen. Like you're really like, you have this calling. And he said that to me. And I was just like, don't say that. Like, that's not true. And well, sure enough, like, within a week, there was this whole big thing that happened. I ended up, my dog knocked me down the steps, and it was all about work. And he just looked at me. He's like, now you're going to quit your job. And I was like, yes, it's time. I'm going to go out, and I'm going to take the leap, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to do this. And that's where this whole idea of whisper, shout, roar comes in, right? Because first your intuition is that little whisper. It's like, hey, you better go do this. And then you ignore it. And then it's like a shout, and there's like a little nudge. And then when you don't, then you get the roar. So I always tell people, listen to the whispers. Intuition will help you to take the easy way when you start listening to that abiding guidance and information that still stays and calls you from within.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a sense sometimes that you just get a mandate from from the universe that you have to do something. In fact, that's how this podcast got started.
Exactly.
I knew nothing about podcasts, but I just got the message, you have to do this, and so I did. I ended up in Rwanda
good for you.
That way too. I was in Rwanda for 7 months, and it was just a mandate from somewhere that you got to do that. So who knows, what life has in store for us, but often it's nothing that we plan. That's for sure.
Yes, and we can't always know why, and we can't plan it. You're right. It's beyond the rational sort of flow of life. And that's when we just have to tune in and trust that the universe is guiding us for a reason, even if we don't know what it is when we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's where that word faith comes in, I think. You just have faith that the universe is giving you the right message, and it's going to take care of you if you listen.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I can identify with that whole thing of having to call somebody. I kept getting the message to call my brother. I hadn't talked to him in 8 months. And it was call my brother. And I would write down, call Rick. But then I would I would ignore it. And then he texted me. And so, the idea was we had to communicate, and I guess he got tired of waiting for me to listen, so he started. But, those things happen a lot.
Yeah, and everybody has those experiences. So it's time to start owning them and living by them.
Yeah. So you make a differentiation between the local field and the non-local field, and how those things interact. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, when we start thinking in terms of, energy and quantum physics and our body, we have a sort of local energetic field where we store all of the data from our personal experiences. And it's a lot like the internet. That's why it's so easy for us to understand quantum physics now. And 200 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to imagine this at all, because we didn't have computers. We didn't have, cloud storage. We didn't have the worldwide internet, phones, all of this stuff that is like we take for granted. It's not only this magical technology, but it helps us to conceive about how this sort of deeper dimension of life works. Because if you look at us as all being sort of individual computers, terminals, sort of connected to a worldwide web of information and all of the stuff that's going on in the world, it's a great analogy for the non-local field and the local field, because we have this local field that stores our personal memories and everything that's sort of happening at this moment in time and space, or right near this moment, a little bit after, a little bit before. All of that stuff we hold here in our local field. But the non-local field, which would be like the internet, we upload all of our stuff to that. So we're constantly uploading everything we're doing to this field that is really can be crowdsourced and is accessible to everyone. So everyone has access to this non-local field. And, that's why in the end, there are no secrets. It's one of the things we talk about when we're really ready to own our intuition. We have to own the facts that there aren't any secrets. And the idea of privacy and singularity is an illusion of living in this three-dimensional world. But everything is really uploaded and stored in the universal database, the cosmic memory bank of all things. And, individually, we're more likely to be able to access information that we're personally entangled with. So that's a concept, that we may be like going into next in this discussion, but I think it's a good time to bring it up because we connect with the energy that we're entangled with. So if you have people that you think about, people that you've had deep emotional experiences with, you're likely to be able to entangle with their information in the quantum field and connect to them. Know that your brother needs a phone call. Know that your child is sick at school. All kinds of things that you can connect with subconsciously, superconsciously through this quantum field by entangling with people through your thoughts and feelings. So, getting information on a stranger that you've never met far away, it's a different thing because you're not entangled with them. It's not that you can't get that information, but it's that, we're not likely to be receiving stuff about people that we don't know or situations that we're not involved with.
So the idea of the Akashic records and what you just explained, what is the entanglement? What's the connection?
Yeah, so this really is a modern day view of understanding the Akashic records. When I first learned about the Akashic records like decades ago, I was like, that's silly, right? A hall of books where you go in and you open up a book and there's my story. I was like, that can't be real, right? That doesn't make any sense. This is like me, the rational brain thinking like somebody's making this up. And then, you go and you have Akashic readings and they work and you're like, wait a second, but they work. And the reason for that is that, the Akashic records, this hall of records was really just a metaphor for the quantum field. When you were going into this hall and opening a book, it was really just a visualization about accessing this information that's stored everywhere in the quantum field and that everyone can access. So it's really just a modern day way of looking at the Akashic records, which was also a modern day version at that time of looking at the ancient concept of Akasha, which the Eastern religions talked about, this invisible field. It was written about this field in the Bhagavad Gita 3,000 years ago. So it's so exciting now to see physics and science finally coming around, being like, yep, that field's real. We knew about it 3,000 years ago. But now we know about it again, and our scientific instruments can actually detect it this time, so we can all agree it's real now.
I've had some Akashic readings. Sometimes it's for a whole group because you're with a group that you've been with spiritually for a while, and then someone comes in and does an Akashic reading for the whole group versus just one person in the group. But it always fascinated me. I've been a follower of Casey pretty much from my youth, and just accepted at face value what he had to say about the Akashic records, and that's what he was tapping into. But your premise in the book is that that's something that we can all tap into. That it isn't
Yeah.
just some special people,
Yes.
who have
Yes.
that library card to take out those books.
Yes.
We all have the library card.
We do. We all have the library card, and I love that. And Edgar Casey was a man born with an incredible gift. I think that people like him, came into this world to show us what was possible for us. Right? The fact that he could do these things and it was so well documented. He again was a regular guy. He wasn't. He didn't have. He wasn't some alien or somebody with superpowers from outer space. He was a regular guy, but he had this gift that showed us what our potential was. So I love that, this he would probably be thrilled right now to see that science is actually backing this up, because he was also a man of science, and knowing that now this really all is really coming into the mainstream in a wonderful way that supports his work and validates his work. So yeah, it was a real honor for me that the being invited to speak there on a few times, because I really appreciate his legacy, and the work that he did is really someone who exposed the Akashic field and what we're able to actually retrieve from it. So we all have that library card. We might not have been born with that incredible gift. We might have to develop that gift. Take some time practicing, learning it. We can. I work with people who start out, who have very sort of little confidence in their intuition, but ultimately end up seeing these magical things happening and tapping into this sort of this hidden dimension of life, and getting these validations that it's real. And these are regular people like you and me, and nobody has to have any specific credentials to use this library card, other than the ability to just open up, receive, and start to trust ourselves.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I guess part of the value of the fact that you've put all this down into a book is that we all have access to it. We all have the ability to go through some of, well, what you call labs, I guess, in the book,
Yes.
for each of the 7 keys. And as we go through those labs, it helps us develop these different abilities, abilities that are built into our DNA, if you will. They're encoded within us, and all we have to do is crack the code.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And don't, like I say, don't just take it from me. I could sit here and talk to intuition about intuition all day long. Every single book that I wrote is actually a book that you can not just read, but you can actually do. You can practice. They all have workshops, little places to experiment, to start witnessing this magic in your own life, because that's sort of my goal, is to empower everybody to witness it for themselves, because you're not really going to trust it and you're not going to believe it until you get to witness it and experience it in your own life.
Yeah. So I guess I want to be sure that we don't run out of time before we get into your contact information.
Okay.
So if people are interested in exploring further and seeing what workshops you have to offer, and I've been on your website a couple times, and there's just such a richness there of resource. Let's make sure people know that you're at kimchestney.com, right?
Yes. Yes, I try. My website's kind of like a playground. I try to create a lot of different opportunities for you to start working with your intuition. We have free insight card decks. I have an online deck. You can pull a card. You can get a little message for this moment. We have an intuition affinity quiz to find out what type of intuitive you are, what your natural strengths are. We have free downloads, podcasts, videos, you name it. So if you're just getting started, or even if you just want to deepen your intuition, there's a lot that you can explore and start to practice right now at my website, kimchestney.com. And then at Intuition Lab's website, that's our school, our intuition school, that's intuition-lab.com. We offer quarterly workshops and year-long workshops if you want to come out and practice in real life and work with your intuition and really get that magic going. And that was my pathway. That's how I ended up where I am. So I love opening space for people to play together with their intuition and really start to develop and step into that magic.
Okay, terrific. Because there's just such a wealth of resource there.
Thank you.
And it is at this point in the podcast where I always ask the guest just to leave our audience with a few words of wisdom. So if you would, I'm going to give you that opportunity now.
Yeah, so I always like to, wrap things up with this book, and it's actually the way I ended the book as well, which is really offering this knowledge and this wisdom that we're sharing as a way to reconnect with the magic and wonder of life. So often we get stuck in our 9 to 5s and we think we understand the world around us, and we get stressed out and life becomes full of anxiety, or we get into ruts. But we live in a beautiful, magical world that is so much more fascinating than we realize. And I wrote this book to help remind people of that and how to reignite the magic and personally experience the magic in your life. So if you're looking for a little more magic in your life, this book is going to help you to get it. And it's my wish that whatever you're doing, that each and every one of you reconnects with that wonder and discovers the true magic that we hold inside of us.
Okay, that's great. A great note to end on. And as always, audience, take what resonates with you, put the rest on a shelf, and pull it down when your intuition tells you you're ready for it. And until next time,
Exactly.
this has been your spiritual journey.